Hi, everybody. Welcome to the September 18th, 2015 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on how both retail customers and growers benefited from Colorado's marijuana tax holiday on Wednesday due to accounting error in state government. Patty Calhoun from Westward, you are our resident pot expert. What was this all about? I don't even know how the tax holiday, but it was a very happy day for pot growers and buyers in Colorado.
I'm going to put some words together that you usually don't hear in conjunction. Doug Bruce and pot. And so part of it is our budget, the state budget, because of Tabor, has certain limitations. And what wound up happening is the state collected more money last year than it anticipated. They didn't want to do it again. It's not that they got more from pot than they anticipated, but pot is what they have a control over. So we had the one pot tax-free day. It was on the transfer from wholesale to retail, 15% tax. But a lot of the retail sales turned that over gave that to their customers as a discount. So it was a big holiday in Colorado, which I'm sure we will celebrate from now on.
David Kofold from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. It sounds like a whole new batch of Tabor fans here being pot customers in Colorado.
If Tabor shines its sun on everyone equally. It's remember the sales tax, the regular sales tax of 2.9% at the state level and sometimes much more than that at the local levels. Those were still collected. So just on this one day, marijuana was treated like every other product rather than having the extra taxes. I think that the big issue will be the win-win that voters face in November when there's an issue about whether a huge amount of additional marijuana taxes. The voters will say either refund that money to us or the government can spend it on extra programs. And the voters will get to choose. Well, either way, there's all this extra money now because it's been brought out of the shadows and into a regulated and heavily taxed lawful status.
Eric Sonman, political analyst, what do you think of Colorado's big pot holiday?
Well, one of these days, Dominic, we have to go the other way around the table because Patty always gets the best lines, and the Doug Bruce one is obvious. All the potheads, all the dispensaries and stores in Colorado were toasting Doug Bruce last week. Maybe there's now a strand of marijuana being named in Doug's honor. I think that's
only right.
I think that would only be fitting. I guess the only other thing I'd note related to marijuana right now was Colorado's moment in the sun at the Republican debate, which I know we're going to talk about in a minute, but Colorado probably got more airtime in that debate than any other state, even though Chris Christie kept wanting to sing the praises of New Jersey given every opportunity. But Colorado once again was the epicenter there, and that's a double-edged sword. I'm not sure John Hickenlooper and the economic development types who are crazy about that being our brand, but it is our brand these days.
And Susan Green, editor of ColoradoIndependent.com. Colorado's pot tax holiday was the best of both worlds for Coloradans. No taxes and discounted pot. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that lots of pot users feel like the prices are so high that they're dissuaded from buying pot when there is a tax. But the fact that I think this figure came out around that event that day was that the pot revenues, tax of pot revenues, have exceeded revenues from alcohol. I think 70 million to 42 million, and I love that. I love that figure as a data freak, and I think it's kind of in and of itself worth celebrating.
Absolutely. Well, as Eric referenced, CNN broadcast the second Republican presidential candidate debate this week, where it seemed some names other than Trump finally gained attention, including Carly Fiorina. Patty, we had all these kinds of candidates, jokes, things back and forth. What were your big takeaways?
Well, of course, Colorado's moment was pretty great, or moments. And Colorado, by legalizing pot, Colorado looks just more libertarian, smarter, all of which these candidates did not look. It was not the most impressive display. I cannot wait to see them coming to University of Colorado next month and to see who will still be standing and who will still be speaking, because you could see that Donald Trump, for example, as an interesting character who certainly has increased interest and livened up the whole political process so far, isn't wearing that well long term, and also has to learn to do a better high five next time he's chatting it up with Jeb Bush. The fact that Jeb Bush loosened up, and that's a little, and that's really not saying much, going from stiff as a board to slightly less stiff. He made some improvements. I thought Trump went back. Obviously, Carly Fiorina was the big winner, I think, in this, just because of the amount of time and attention she got. She looked more intelligent than the rest. I frankly loved her response on the $10 bill issue. Which was she didn't want to be marginalized as a woman. She could have said her mother like Ben Carson, but I thought her answer worked better. So overall, I think this political season is incredible. It's great to watch everything. It's great to hear as much as we can hear, but it's going to be a long, long 14 months.
David, the debates that are going to be in Boulder aren't that far away. Do you think the group has at least been weaned down a little bit from Rick Perry's dropped out? Do you see any other people dropping out, at least names that we can recognize between now and the CU debates?
No, not between now and October. The ones, some like Jeb Bush, have enough money to keep going for a long time, and others, say Lindsey Graham, we don't have much money. You can run a campaign on fumes for a while. John McCain, as of August 2007, was on the floor, and everybody thought he was dead, and they didn't have enough money for yard signs in New Hampshire, and he managed to win the Republican nomination. So there's still a lot of fight left in all of them. In terms of a debate where you want people to see who actually has substance, has a point, not everybody wants that, but for those of us who do, clearly Carly Fiorina, number one, and Marco Rubio, number two, consistent, thoughtful answers. You may agree or disagree with their policies, but they know what their policies are and they can articulate them in a very good way. Now that Fiorina has deservedly fought her way into the top tier, now the negatives are going to start coming on her, of which the rolling out today is reprises of the ad that killed her Senate campaign in California, which is, you were a terrible CEO of Hewlett-Packard, 30,000 layoffs, and you bought yourself a corporate yacht at the same time. That could be a quite effective attack. Her defenders will say, well, everybody makes mistakes, nobody has a perfect career. But the fact is, Donald Trump, who's been in bankruptcy 4 times, not personally, just the companies and all the investors he ripped off, who I'm sure he brought in by saying, oh, this is great, this is a world-class investment, until it's like 3 years later and it's like, oh, I'm going to screw you and use the bankruptcy code. I think he might do the same thing to the American people. But Barack Obama, although it was undercovered, was a failed chief executive when he and Bill Ayers ran this huge school reform initiative in Chicago and Illinois where they got all this goody-goody corporate money, and it was a freaking disaster. And the fact that he was a failed chief executive at that, I think, foreshadowed some of his serious weaknesses as a managerial type chief executive as president. So Fiorina is going to have to address this and convince justifiably skeptical voters about why her tenure at Hewlett-Packard should not disqualify her from an even higher management position.
Eric, these early debates are really just more for entertainment, but also it shows where the momentum can change. I mean, Fiorina's strong momentum, I'm seeing a lot less on people like Scott Walker. If you have your magic wand, maybe by Thanksgiving, what number do you think we're at? If we're at 16 candidates right now, where are we at Thanksgiving?
I don't fully know the answer to that, but I guess I would challenge on a couple of counts, Dominic. One, yes, we're at 16 candidates right now, if you're counting every name, but we're not really at 16 candidates.
Sure.
You can look at that stage and at the preliminary stage, and there are a half dozen at most, in my mind, who are plausible nominees of the party. The others are hanging around, they're taking up space, they're becoming marginally less relevant as we go. I secondly would disagree with you a bit, Dominic, and usually we're on the same page, that these debates, early debates, aren't that meaningful. They're not decisive, because there's not a single voter who's going to be heard from for another 4 or 5 months. But I think they are meaningful in terms of voters getting to know the people, establishing a pecking order, the exchange and the interplay between the candidates. Donald Trump, and no one at this table has been more critical of him. I think the guy's an embarrassment, a buffoon, bombastic. We can go through adjectives all night long about Donald Trump, but he has served one purpose. He's getting TV viewers to tune in. There were 23 million pairs of eyeballs watching that debate the other night. Now, I'm not sure how many of them were left in hour number 3. I think the first thing we should stipulate is 3 hours is way, way too long. Second thing we should stipulate is that Fox debate was much better run with Megyn Kelly and them than this debate. Jake Tapper's a good journalist, but he was ill-served by the format of that debate. David's pecking order would be my pecking order as well. I think the most impressive ones on the night, in whatever order, were Carly Fiorina and Marco Rubio. That were not the Republicans could do a lot worse than that ticket in whatever order those two names are arranged. We'll see if that's viable. I get a great kick out of thinking of all the pent-up demand in this country, and rightly so, to finally have a female president. Well, what if it was not Hillary Clinton? And what if all of those people who've been waving the Ready for Hillary yard signs were given a choice of Ms. Fiorina? And that would be quite a spectacle to watch. As to Jeb Bush, Donald Trump ought to be paying the guy rent because he's taken up occupancy inside his brain. He is so deep into Jeb Bush's head. And the two of them standing next to each other, I don't think served Jeb very well. Lastly, Scott Walker is the great shrinking candidate. He just seems to be disappearing as each week goes by. He looked completely overmatched in that debate.
Susan, after you saw what we've seen both in the first Fox debate and the CNN debate, are you excited for the debate that's going to be here in Boulder?
I am very much. I think it's great. We're a swing state. We are so relevant in 2016, and so I think it's a great coup for us and for CU. I tend, this is such a red letter day, to agree with David and Eric about how healthy it is that we have this huge, I think you called it earlier, a clown car, a huge number of candidates at this point. They are debating. I think there is a real benefit to having this debate, and kind of, I think Donald Trump is doing a huge service to the process by galvanizing people and bringing people who otherwise aren't part of the political discussion into the fold. I think the best part of it at this point, like David said, it doesn't cost a lot of money to be a candidate right now. This is not about money. It's not about ads. It's not about door knockers. It's about a real democratic process. And I hope there are as many candidates in that GOP lineup as possible going into the convention, so it's a real nominating convention. So there's really a discussion about the platform and the party's platform. And just as the clock boy kind of created a huge conversation this week about racial discrimination and profiling, I think Donald Trump is, in and of itself, he's just creating all sorts of conversations about immigration and other issues that I think benefits the party. And I think the Democrats would do well to have an equally robust debate, which they're not.
See if they might be tempted to see the kind of the ratings they're getting with these debates. Who knows? Governor John Hickenlooper announced plans this week to dedicate $100 million over the next 4 years toward making Colorado more bicycle friendly. The funds would be dedicated to connecting Colorado's bike trails, building pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, and maintaining paths. David, while I think people like all the activity in Colorado, and especially it's a lot of people on bicycles, but $100 million is not chump change. There's a lot of things I think probably a lot of Coloradans like to see $100 million go to. What do you think?
Well, some of these are from dedicated funds for which it's appropriate. Personally, I like it when the government spends things to benefit everyone in general rather than special interests. So bike paths and parks are close to the top of my spending priorities, so I'd say it's great. My concern is the money being allocated by Governor Hickenlooper, the guy who said, how do we wean ourselves off automobiles? There is an element at the extreme end of the pro-bike lobby, which not only is pro-bike, which I am, but also is anti-automobile. And they do things that are ostensibly for the benefit of bikes, but really are more for the purpose of persecuting automobile drivers. And, you know, not everybody can be like John Hickenlooper wants us to be in Copenhagen or Amsterdam, taking a Schwinn bike to the grocery store. You know, some people are older, for example, or whatever. Maybe they don't have the time. And I really worry that Hickenlooper is going to pervert this the way it's been done in Boulder, where you do things to deliberately increase automobile congestion for the trivially small benefits for bikes. You narrow roadways, add pollution, slow down traffic, supposedly under the pretext of being pro-bike.
Eric, are the prophetic words of Dan Mays finally coming to pass here in Colorado with the idea of bicycles taking over everything that is state government?
That's a name we haven't heard for a while. Thank you, Dominic.
You're welcome.
The Dan Mays reference, I think that should be required every few months around this table. First of all, I've been to Copenhagen a couple times. It's a wonderful city. Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs are not going to be Copenhagen. Can we just stipulate that? It's complete cultural difference. I love my bike. It has become my main form of recreation and exercise these days. I love that Colorado is a very fit state. I love that Colorado is a very bicycle-friendly state. But as your question points out, $100 million is real coin. And I'm curious if John Hickenlooper and his cadre are going to be taking their bikes all over Colorado as part of this Building a Better Colorado tour, where they convince people that the state is completely underfunded and Tabor's a complete mess. I do worry about it a little bit given the magnitude of the price tag from a messaging point of view. At the same time, they're trying to convince us of what a fiscal crisis we're in, able to throw around that kind of money. That said, the more people on bikes, the better, within reason, so that it does not further complicate traffic patterns, as David pointed out.
Susan, few politicians have had the success when it comes to raising money or efforts like John Hickenlooper. He's very good at it. Can he make this happen?
I think he can. I've been critical of Governor Hickenlooper on a lot of issues, but this is Governor Hickenlooper at his very best. And I agree, we're not Copenhagen, and we don't. Just the size of Colorado makes it such that we can't all ride our bikes to the Safeway. But I think announcing it in Las Vegas the way he did, Hickenlooper is a marketer. He's our marketer in chief, even though he actually has a marketer in chief. He's a supremely good marketer, and to do this at a bicycle event and do it in a way that kind of tries to lure people to Colorado, I think in tourism in and of itself will pay off probably. And I've been up in the mountains a lot lately, and I feel like I'm always going to hit a cyclist. I'm not up there riding my bike up mountains, but I'm that nervous driver who feels like right around the bend I'm going to. And so for the sake of people like Eric, I don't want to hit Eric on his bike. And my kids who love to bike, I'd like to see as many bike lanes as possible just for safety reasons.
Patty, people love bikes in Colorado. A lot of people do it themselves, but people also like driving in the mountains. And if they're seeing space being built for bike lanes and thinking, wait a second, why am I sitting here in traffic while bikes are whipping by me because I'm still in 2-hour waits before Eisenhower? Is there going to be a conflict on this because there's still a very big love affair with cars in Colorado?
Well, there already is a conflict. Every time you drive or ride in Denver or anywhere else, you're scared to death you're going to hit someone or be hit. So I think this added emphasis and setting up some protective things, I have no problem if people in bike lanes are zipping past the people stuck in cars on I-70 as long as there are still lanes for cars on I-70. And David brings up a good point, which is you still have to accommodate cars. Look at the rebellion we had from rural Colorado only a couple of years ago. You cannot really use bicycles reasonably if you are trying to commute from Cortez to Durango. You might be able to have an interesting day excursion, but it's not what most people are going to need. In rural Colorado, you need to be able to drive. And so I think this is part of an overall state emphasis, not just on bikes, but on roads. But it's fulfilling a lot of the promise that Hickenlooper made when he was mayor that has slowed in Denver. The amount of money they wanted to put into bike lanes hasn't been forthcoming. But now on a statewide level, I think as long as they balance it, it'll work well. And good exposures this weekend, not just announcing it in Las Vegas, but right before Pedal the Plains, which will show that bikes do have a place out on the plains of Colorado too.
Denver Mayor Michael Hancock has proposed a $1.26 billion budget for 2016, including funding for police body cameras and a homeless solution center. In addition, $24 million would go toward rebuilding the sheriff's department, which is currently suffering an employment shortage and requiring mandatory overtime for its deputies. Eric, usually we don't get into the details of the city budget, but just in the first blush, you see $24 million to the Sheriff's Department. Is that enough? Are you seeing the right priorities?
I have no idea if it's enough. I'm not in the weeds of Sheriff's Department budget, I think as the Denver Post editorial and others have pointed out, what the Sheriff's Department needs, yes, they probably need more funding, they clearly need more deputies, but they also need some leadership, and that has been a long, extended process with, I'm not aware that there's an end in sight to getting a top dog in that department. So money is part of what they need, but is not the whole thing of what they need. They need reform, cultural reform, policy reform, and a leader. Going back to the previous topic of bikes and roads, I was intrigued with this budget. And again, I'm not in the weeds as a fiscal person, but there was discussion of everything from expediting permits to the Sheriff's Department to a zillion and one other issues. The one that I did not see emphasized in this budget was roads. And I think if you tap the political sentiment of most people around Denver these days, the number one issue is the rapidly growing congestion and just how long it takes to move around town and how dramatically more difficult it's become in not that many years. And that was a key issue in a lot of those city council races we just went through. And I did not see that emphasized in this budget.
Susan, your thoughts on the budget?
My thought on the budget was I looked at the $24 million for the Sheriff's Department, and then I looked at $8 million for affordable housing, and my jaw dropped. I agree, I understand they're short-staffed at the Sheriff's Department. They're short-staffed because morale is terrible, because there's no leadership, and because they are a wayward department. I think the mayor could save millions of dollars on reforming that department if he just grew a spine and started firing the sheriff's deputies who kill people and firing the attorneys and the managers who on their behalf in court lie and cover up the lies. And so, there are vastly more Denverites who need affordable housing than need incarceration. And I don't know how you can justify $24 million for reforming the Sheriff's Department, $8 million for affordable housing, especially when the administration says $8 million will help build hundreds of affordable housing units. If you do the math, that's not even possible. Even with leveraging private dollars, that's just not even possible. And I think the priorities are very mixed up.
Especially in Denver, the kind of real estate, they're not buying anything. I totally agree. Patty, your thoughts on the budget?
Well, with the Sheriff's Department, it might actually prove to be a good investment if we don't have to keep making the huge, huge payouts we've had from complaints from prisoners with mistreatment. But it is true, you don't need the money to make the first fixes that have to happen there, which is good communication on what the proper procedures are. And if you go into the Homeless Solutions Center, that's another good example of where the Hancock administration needed to have some advanced communication with the ballpark neighborhood, for example, which filed a suit, which is making some progress against a daycare center there, a homeless day center there too. So, I had talked about the bicycles, that there's nothing about transportation. The bicycle people in the state, in Denver particularly, are very upset that it seems to have stalled. So I would say some education is required all around. What are the rules of the road? Why is every road seemingly under construction, just backing everything up? I think Denver's in a good place financially. It's an excellent time to just get things moving and get some discussion going.
David, your quick take.
The idea of firing deputies who abuse people is a very good idea, but impossible in Denver because the sheriffs deputies are under civil service, and that goes from the lowliest deputy all the way up to the undersheriff, the number 2 guy there. We don't have this problem of needing $24 million in order to be able to hire more people at the 62 other counties where sheriffs are elected, and they have full authority to hire and fire, and the people have the full authority to hire and fire the sheriff who isn't doing a good job. That model works in Colorado. The Denver model doesn't.
For everyone playing CIO bingo at home, we did get to the Denver Sheriff's Department. The Denver Sheriff should be elected, so congratulations for everyone who got bingo on that one. Yeah. Let's get to Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
The View for taking off after Miss Colorado, Kelly Johnson, who did a great job on the pageant, talking about nurses. What did they want her to wear? A slutty nurse outfit from Halloween instead of her scrubs?
David.
There are all these people with the Pope's visit saying that he is a terrible economist, and that is a fair criticism. But to be fair, these people should also say that most economists would be terrible popes.
Eric.
Hard to follow. I'm going to break the rules, Dominic. Usually I'm long on disgraces and short on say something nices. I actually have two something nices, so I'm going to go with one of them right here. This is a nice, not a disgrace. That's to President Obama. We can all be critical of him. He gave a speech in Iowa this week, and he went after, and he's situated to do it, what he called the coddling on college campuses these days, and the whole notion of microaggressions and triggers and political correctness. And good for President Obama. I hope he adopts this as an ongoing theme.
Susan.
The state, for getting itself in the position where we're spending $20 million a year on CSP2, an all solitary confinement prison south of Colorado Springs, especially if you look at the numbers we were just talking about at the city, $20 million in debt relief on a completely shuttered 5-year-old or 6-year-old prison where nobody is insane.
Say something nice, Patty?
I want to say something nice about Katie Atkinson, a political consultant who was a frequent and always welcome face around this table. She's going through a tough time, but she always made our days brighter here.
Hear, hear.
Jeremy Corbyn, the new leader of the British Labour Party, who used his first question time, that food fight we see on C-SPAN sometimes, to instead of making it a food fight, to actually ask thoughtful questions, which he solicited from the British public.
Eric.
I'm going the same place Patty was. Katie Atkinson has been a friend. She's been a partner of many of us around this table. We did projects together in years gone by. Somebody of great character, somebody of a great sense of humor, always able to get that one-line jab in. She's traveling a difficult road right now, and we wish her and her family the best.
Absolutely. Susan.
Judge Michael Martinez, Denver District Judge, who did a very impressive job last week on the hearing involving whether the Denver DA should have prosecuted the sheriff for slamming an inmate against a wall.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Remember that you can catch any part of our show or CIO postgame online, and be sure to check out CIO Podcast on iTunes. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.
My name is Sarah Newberry, and I am the floor director here for Colorado Inside Out and Colorado Public 12. And what I mainly do is I am the go-between the control room and the talent. So I am listening in on my headset, and they are giving me direction on when to tell the talent to stand by, whether or not I need them to read through their script, whether or not they need to look at a certain camera. They tell me, and then I will go ahead and relay that onto the talent.
Here we go. Studio, are you ready?
Yes, sir. We're ready on the floor. So one of the responsibilities of the floor director is making sure everything on the floor is in its place and ready to go for the television show that we're going to tape. So that includes making sure set pieces are correctly placed on the floor, lighting is in the correct place, and shooting the correct places. Set pieces, which tables and chairs, they are in not only in alignment with the camera, but in alignment with the set pieces behind them. Another one of the things I like to do, and it is part of the floor director's job, is to make sure all of the talent is properly mic'd and ready to go, what we call camera ready. So if they need a little makeup, they have water available to take a sip, they have the correct script in front of them, and they're seated in the correct chair. Another one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure everyone is looking good for television. My motto is if they don't look good, I don't look good. And my name's on the credits, so I want to make sure everybody on set is looking their best. So I make sure everybody's hair is set in case they have a couple of flyaways, get those down. Everyone has a tendency to look a little shiny on TV, so we always have a little bit of powder, and I have it marked for this is my lightest powder. So just have a little powder handy, knock down some of the shine, and just make sure overall that everybody looks and feels their best so that they can present themselves great on TV, which makes for a great story, which makes for a great show. So that when the all-important time comes and the director is in my ear saying,
Floor director ready for mic and cue.
stand by, we're going to start in 5, 4, 3, and I get them going. So I'll see you on the next episode of Colorado Inside Out.
I have no idea. Why do elephants paint their toenails red?
To hide in cherry trees. No, wait, no, I know it. Okay. No, wait. Have you ever seen an elephant in a cherry tree?
I have not.
Apparently it's because you never see one.
Welcome to the September 18th edition of Colorado Inside Out Post Game, a special web exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on the reaction to Congressman Jared Polis and his comments about sexual assaults on college campuses. Patty Cahoon from Westward. Now, there's a whole different detail here, but Polis found himself in some hot water and actually had to backtrack and apologize for comments he made in a subcommittee hearing. What'd you think?
Well, and he had to apologize because this is a difficult issue. And it's one that deserves a lot of attention. When you went to college 40 years ago, they weren't really taking sex assault seriously, problems between students seriously. So you need to take it seriously, but you also need to give the person who's accused a fair hearing, which Polis didn't do with his new rules. It's such a tough crime because only 2 people know what happened, and usually in colleges, maybe neither of them really know what happened because they were drunk as skunks. So it's a very tricky issue, but it's one that deserves attention. I would recommend John Krakauer's book, Missoula, to anyone. He's a Boulder author. Great book about University of Montana, which had such trouble with sex assaults and the DA's office not taking them seriously. In that case, the school was, but the district attorney in Missoula was not. So huge issue, but deserved a little more time and attention and study from Jared Polis.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. It seemed that one of the issues that Polis brought up was that, hey, if someone's accused of a sexual assault on a college campus, they should be expelled. And that's where he got into trouble. But it was about a conversation about referring sexual assault cases to the police versus the campus being to have a preponderance of evidence. I didn't know all the different details when it comes to the legal stuff like that, but for us, if we dug into it, what does all that stuff mean?
If somebody's a rapist, expelling them from college is an insufficient solution by far. They should be criminally prosecuted and put in prison to protect everyone. And even if you expelled them from college, but they're a rapist, they could come back to the college or they can go any other place. So saying college-only handling is grossly insufficient for the people who are the genuine criminals. Jared Polis is I think, in his heart has libertarian inclinations, is genuinely concerned with due process and fairness for everybody as his overall perspective. And so for a guy like him to say those completely indefensible remarks that he did tells you how far this climate of hysteria, which is being ginned up by the Obama Department of Education and others, has gone. And gone from being, you can sort of look at it like McCarthyism are there Soviet spies in this country? Yes, and we ought to do something about them. And that's a real serious problem. On the other hand, the fact that somebody, thinks socialism is a good idea, which we should enact by the vote of the people through the democratic process, that doesn't mean that they're spying for the Soviet Union. And there was some confusion in the 1950s, in the early days, between those two, and it's the same kind of McCarthyite tactics going on now. Behind this movement to persecute people who have not been proven guilty by any standard, even 51%, to say that they should be denied due process, is a movement which is a coalition of people who hate our Constitution, people who are heterophobic, and people who are androphobic, and sometimes all three of those. It's time for this to stop. Everybody deserves fairness and fair treatment instead of this presumption of guilt, which the Department of Education and unfortunately sometimes Representative Polis has been pushing on people.
Eric Sonneman, political analyst. Did Polis's apology go far enough? Because he apologized for the remarks, but he still had a firm stance on the issue that David illuminated on, which was thinking that the colleges still needed to have the authority to move on these assaults rather than just shifting to police, because he criticized how police were handling these kinds of cases. Did he strike the right balance?
I'm going to defend Jared Polis here, not on the substance of what he said, particularly the first time out, that he had to clarify and had to backtrack, but on two counts. Number one, he's dealing with an important, difficult, sensitive issue. And maybe it is slightly hyperbolic to call it an epidemic, but only at the margins. This issue is rampant across college campuses. As Patty points out, it goes hand in hand with an epidemic of alcohol abuse, and maybe that's not wholly different than when we were college students, but the magnitude of some of the problems are certainly different. And secondly, let's give Jared Polis some credit. As David pointed out, I disagree with a lot of what David said, but as David pointed out, he has some libertarian instincts. He is not a down-the-line, completely predictable partisan animal. He is an original thinker on some issues. He has an independent streak, and we ought to have more politicians with such an independent streak and with such a willingness to think outside the box. His notion that he came to in the clarification that at a minimum what colleges and universities should be obligated to do of creating physical distance between the alleged culprit and the complaining victim, that should be the absolute minimum standard on college campuses. In a legal setting, I'm not a lawyer here, but in a legal setting, it's tantamount to a restraining order or something like that to enforce some physical distance. Yes, accused in these circumstances, because David is right that it is, you have few more serious charges and that they're entitled to fairness. Now, fairness in a college setting does not need to exactly look like the full due process and Miranda rights and everything else in a court of law. I think there can be a different standard in a different kind of proceeding. I think where Polis went the first time was probably an insufficient standard, but I don't think we also have to go the full other extreme and pretend that these are full courts of law. It's a complicated issue. It's a close one for me. We could go on. I'll let Susan go.
Susan Green, editor of ColoradoIndependent.com. Representative Polis has Colorado's two big college campuses within his district, both CU and CSU. What did you think of his handling of this issue?
I thought the original comment didn't bother me as much as the follow-up or defense of the remarks during the time and before he apologized, when he said, and I'm reading his quote, "There's really no winning once the accusation is made." It just makes me think of the Duke lacrosse case when the accusation was wrongly made and there was an overzealous DA who for political reasons was pursuing these members of the Duke lacrosse team who were exonerated. And I agree there's a big problem with sexual assault on campus, and I think both of those campuses are doing their very best to address them. I really do. I mean, obviously more continues to need to be done, but I don't think due process should look really any different on a college campus than it does anywhere else. And we have a problem with wrongful convictions in the state. And I agree. Jared is a thoughtful, independent thinker, and I would invite him to go speak to Clarence Mosesel, who appears to have been wrongfully convicted and spent 28 years in prison for a rape it appears he didn't commit, and there's been a confession to in the past month and a half. This quote, "There's really no winning once the accusation is made," it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that there is winning once the accusation is made, because every wrongful conviction, be it on campus or in the general public, is a cold case. And I don't think we need more public officials jumping on the bandwagon of let's solve it for the case of solving it, no matter what the truth is.
That's all the time we have for Colorado Inside Out postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.